going to say, speaking of not much cash on hand,
Okay. Oh,
like that.
speaking of, yeah,
That
there you go.
segue.
Go for it. So
See, maybe I should introduce more segments. I think I make better segues than
you're
you
better. That
do.
was a better one than usually I do. Yeah,
That was
go
a
ahead.
better segue.
So go ahead.
Speaking of not much cash on hand, um, so I found this really interesting little piece here about millennials and the choices that they are making that are different from the generations before them in a number of arenas. And I thought it would be fun if we maybe take a look at some of the argument, because millennials, people love to compliment them for how smart they are, and simultaneously they like to rag on them for the life choices they are currently making. So I thought it might be fun to zoom in on some of these, and Duncan and I can, offer our opinions. We
Well,
haven't discussed this with each other, so I guess I don't know if we're going to agree or not.
Gen Z, just get ready because this is a lot of you too, and it's gonna get worse. So yeah, so we'll jump into this.
So hold on. You know what? I'm not using I've got a crystal for that mug.
Right.
I've got grumpy here. I should have had that because we're going to look into our crystal ball and tell you what we think is coming down the pipeline for the next
4 years
the
at
next
least. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I will say this for Gen Z, this is already starting to affect them, and then it is covered in this video that Lacey covered. But yeah, let's jump into this. So this is about millennials actually staying and living with their parents, so multi-generation households. So yeah.
About 1 in 3 Americans between 18 and 34 years old live with their parents.
And while you may have heard more about this recently, this trend isn't new.
Between 2005 and 2015, the share just grew very steeply over this 10-year period. Since then, it's been fairly stable. There was an uptick, of course, during the pandemic. In the wake of the pandemic, those rates of parental co-residence are now about where they were right before. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks.
Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save, but don't make enough money. And roughly 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Z adults feel it's harder to build financial wealth now than when their parents were their age because of the economy. 27-year-old Victoria Franklin has been living with her mother in New Jersey since she graduated college in 2019.
So
a lot of this video is about kind of her perspective, but we've talked about this a lot on the show, which is wages have been flat for a long time. They haven't grown much, but costs have, and inflation's been going up. Whatever 3.5% I think is the average right now. And then if you do, you factor in, okay, college costs are 8-9 times what they used to be. So just to get an education in the workforce is way more expensive, and housing is 5 or 6 times what it used to be as compared to real income. So just surviving anymore is more difficult. Plus, you need more stuff. You got to have a computer, a cell phone. You got to have all these extra expenses. So, yeah, I think it's drained a lot of people, and it makes sense that you'd have a multi-generational household. So, like when I lived in Hawaii, most people live, and it's 2 or 3 generations in a household. Grandma and
Well,
grandpa.
quite frankly, we're one of the few cultures that doesn't do that. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't want to do that.
No.
Mom, I love you. Not that I think she's watching. But Mom, I love you, but I don't want to live with my mother.
Right.
I don't. I don't want to live with my grandmother. Don't want to live with my mother. I don't have any kids, but I can assure you, if I did, once they're adults, I want them to go somewhere else and live.
Right.
I don't want to live multi-generationally. That being said, we're in the minority for sure, people across the world.
Right.
More people are living multi-generational than we do.
Right, and the other thing about it is we've gotten into this from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s through the 80s and 90s. This idea of the nuclear family, right? The parents and the kids. And then when the kids grow up, leave, and they have kids, but it's not these multi-generational, which used to be more normal. And in a lot of places it is normal. Like I said, when I lived in Hawaii, it is so freaking expensive housing there because it's an island. There's not that much space. So it's not unusual to have 3 or 4 generations in a house. Right? So they get like bigger houses so everybody can fit, but it's a lot of people. But I can tell you right now, just like renting an apartment, like a studio, a really crappy studio apartment, was the first apartment I had there for the first 6 months I was there. That was like $2,200 a month, and that was what? 15, 16 years ago?
Mm.
I mean, it's got to be phenomenal today. So I think the problem too is the mentality is that that's not acceptable, or you're lazy, or you're mooching if blah blah, blah, as opposed to no, you're just being pragmatic. And I want to jump to this because this is this woman's aunt. We'll jump to her a couple times because the aunt has this sort of opinion.
Afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya. 36% of Americans said in a 2022 survey that more young adults living with their parents is bad for society. So here's why young Americans are choosing to live with their parents and what the implications are for the U.S. economy.
My name is Victoria Franklin. I am 27 years old, and I live in my childhood home with my mother and my boyfriend.
Victoria graduated from the University of Miami in 2019 and moved in with her mom when she was looking for a job.
After I saw the cost of living and things like that after I graduated, that maybe I'd be home for about a year.
More than half of Gen Z adults say they don't make enough money to live the life they want due to high cost of living.
Which is true. I think that's fair. But you see her mother's house is huge. So...
Okay, but that also sounds pretty entitled. I'm going to take a little opposite approach here.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty entitled. Oh, I can't live the life I want. I can't have the lifestyle. You know, like... sorry, it took me a lot of years to get to have anything that would even qualify as being called a lifestyle.
Sure, but...
That's just called being young and broke.
Yeah, but the difference is that if you were young and broke in the 80s or 90s, you could have that lifestyle in 10 or 15 years. Now it's very, very difficult unless you come from money. So like in her situation, she's very, very privileged. Look at the house her mother has. Right?
Yeah, well, and I forget where in this segment is. Maybe we're getting to it, and maybe I'm spoiling. But it seems that the case is that if I remember correctly, she's like banking everything that would go to rent. She's not even contributing to the parents.
No. I mean, but that's their situation.
Initially. I mean,
that's theirs.
But it's very privileged. I'm just saying.
No.
This one's pretty privileged.
Yeah, she's kind of an interesting example in that sense, where it's like mom and dad don't expect her to contribute, which is, whatever. But, a lot of people don't have that luxury. So you think about it from a perspective of somebody who mom and dad don't have a big house, or they're not close to their parents, or whatever it is, right? Now it's like, okay, now you're in that same boat she's in, but now you have to rent. So you don't have the ability to save.
Right.
And it's difficult to get ahead. So you're basically just working to pay for shit so you can work to pay for shit. And it's cyclical and you're never getting anywhere. And I can see where, I can't live the life I want to live is not an unfair statement. Because I'm basically just a drone at this point. And that's my existence. I could see where I'd be pissed too. I mean,
Well, you know what? Her parents probably feel like they're just a drone too, though. The generation that's older than that probably doesn't feel like they're not that if they're still in the workforce. You know what I'm saying?
No, but they have the shit. They have the house and the car, and they've had the wealth built up. They didn't have the stagnant wage problem. Right? And they get into that a little bit later too. But that's the thing, is her parents had the ability to do these things because of the economy and the time period they grew up in. She's grown up in a period where there hasn't been wage growth, any significant wage growth in the last 30 years. So what is she supposed to do in this era, right?
It was one of the big factors influencing whether or not they were living on their own or living with their parents.
A significant number of Gen Z adults and millennials lack emergency savings. In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings.
This can have ramifications for setting up a financial future.
So, just the debt thing. I know a lot of guys will sit there and go, oh, well, that's their fault for racking up the debt. And it's a lot of times it's like, yeah, but that's not really what happens. What happens is they needed it for an emergency. They needed, new tires for their car or something like that, and they just couldn't pay it back because they don't make enough money. So they end up having to take credit because they're living in a deficit half the time. Because when you live paycheck to paycheck, yeah, go ahead.
That's the truth. Regardless of what generation you're in, that's the truth for a lot of people in the United States. Just in general, like the way frequently it's not shopping, might be a little bit of mismanagement for having like a lack of budget in your life, but it's not largely usually a management issue in that people are shopping or whatever. A lot of times it's, something came up that's one of those once in a while things like, oh crap, flat tire, couldn't patch it, need to actually get a new one.
Right. Something
with my vehicle, whatever, that kind of stuff. Big, huge vet bill, something, and they couldn't cover it, Yeah,
that's a lot of it. I also get the point about, I don't want to rent. Well, it's like, yeah, I can see where if you don't have to rent, I mean, it'd be better to live with your parents and pay rent to them because at least they're getting some benefit out of it. And they're probably not going to charge you what you'd pay for an apartment, and you'd probably be living a better standard of living. I can see that argument right there.
If both the parents and the adult kids are good with that, I don't mind that solution as so long as the parents are getting some financial help from the kids, because I don't think it's fair for that only to go one direction. Parents spend their entire lives sacrificing and giving to their kids, so if they're going to be giving to the kids in that way, they should also be getting a little bit of financial relief.
Well, right. And in the circumstance where you have a good enough relationship with your parents where you can help them out and give them some rent and, chip in and make it more feasible for everybody, remember, when they die, you're getting that money. So it's really just investing in yourself at that point. So.
Right. It's sort of like the way your equity builds in your house, and you're putting your equity in your parents.
Right.
I mean, but listen, if, I don't know where in New Jersey she is, but if her just renting a room from somebody was going to cost her $1,000 and she's kicking her mom $500 a month, mom's up $500 a month, plus somebody to help with chores around the house, and the kids up $500 a month because that's a $500 a month savings, and everybody's winning.
Yeah.
I don't mind them like that, but some of these stories don't shake out that way. Some of them shake out and younger person sponging off of the parent, and I gotta say, on that one, I'm a little on team stop sponging off of your parent. You got to help them out too.
No, I think it depends too on the situation. Like, it might be that her parents are so rich that it doesn't matter to them. Right?
Yeah, maybe.
Hopefully. They don't care. The other thing about some of that is, when I know I made it sound selfish, like you're going to inherit the money. The other thing about it is, and it is a little selfish, but it's practical too, which is, and I think about this because I'm an only child. And my parents are divorced, and my father's remarried. So I've got 3 parents that are aging. And I got to think about, oh God, what's it going to cost to take care of them as they get older? And do they have enough money to do it? Or is it going to end up coming on me, where it's like, well, either you're helping your parents out or you're sticking them in some really shitty nursing home. Right?
You know what? Or you could scare the shit out of them and tell them that they're both going to have to come and live with you, and they'll have to live with each other again. Oh God, you should really do that. That's such a good idea.
I've done that. They don't like that one.
I like that one. You should do that one all the time.
I do. They don't find it funny, but we do. I mean, but...
I can imagine your parents' reaction to it. Not of amusement at all, especially your mother. I don't think your mother would be too pleased.
No, I think they'd rather I just kill them. So, yeah, excuse me.
I think so.
But yeah, it depends on the circumstance. But that's when you got to think about that stuff too. And I know, like, for younger people, you don't think about it, but like, trust me, you start to get into like your 30s and 40s, and your parents start getting old. You start going, oh shit, what am I going to do with these people? I mean, they're going to get old. I can't, can they pay for themselves? Can they take care of themselves?
And if you're somebody that has kids, you have 2 sets of little people. Old people start getting littler, and then there's the little people you created, and you got to figure out what to do with all of them and how to finance all of it.
Right,
Ay,
like,
ay, ay.
and even though we were joking about it, that does happen where your thought is, okay, well, if they're going to get old and they can't really take care of themselves, maybe they have to come live with you or stay in a nursing facility. Nursing facilities are expensive. Like a decent nursing home, you're paying $6,000 a month. And that's a decent one. That's not even a nice one. Right? So you got to factor all that in. And if they want to get like Medicaid or something, which we'll get into, was probably going to get cut some, like in their old age, they have to be broke to get that, which means you're not getting any inheritance. So all the money's bled out. Right, so you got to factor in how you want to handle these things going forward. But like Lacey said, if you got kids too, it's like, yeah, maybe grandma and grandpa could come stay with you and take care of your kids. And then, you know, maybe that's the case in 20 years, that's what she'll be doing. This girl in the video. But,
Maybe.
it could be. But, yeah, so let's skip to, because I want to jump to a couple of the parts here. So let's go to this part here.
Into savings. My mentality is why rent and give my money to someone else when I can start to own? And so a big chunk of that money is going to go towards a down payment on a
So she's saving for a house. That's why they're doing this.
house.
Young adults ages 25 to 34 in high cost of living areas are more likely to live with their parents. Nearly 26% of young adults in New Jersey were living with at least one of their parents in 2022. The median household income in Oceanport, New Jersey, where the Franklins live, was nearly $133,000 in 2022, while
Okay, so that's, I would say, the median income. So I want to clarify this because everybody thinks, don't confuse median and average. Median means 50% of everybody made that or less. That amount, what was it again? It was 130 something.
Yeah.
Yeah, hang on. See if I can find it again. 132, 723. So 50%. So the average was probably a little higher. Average is always higher than the median, but that's what the median income is. So that's the bottom half of people are making that or less. Right? So I just want to put a pin in that. That's a lot of money because nationwide, the median is like 55,000. So this is a really rich part of the world that we're living in.
in 2022,
It's
while
also
the
an
median
expensive
value
part
of a
the world
home
because
Yeah.
while I'm New York City, you know, I work with a lot of people that actually live in New Jersey, and New Jersey is not a cheap place to live either.
No.
The spaces are much larger than what we have here in this city, and that's what they're getting for it. But they're not really getting a cheaper cost of living. They're getting more space, blah blah, lots of tolls, bigger commute. You know, like
Right.
it's expensive over there.
Right, and it depends on where you're at because we've had this discussion before where like 6 figures in New York is different than 6 figures in Portland. 6 figures in Portland is pretty good money. 6 figures in New York is, you know, you got to be a little bit more practical about how you spend your money.
Right.
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 So, but yeah, it depends on where you're at. Like, I've had that before. Like, I have clients that live in Mexico, and it's like, oh yeah, they're living on their interest from their retirement. And they're getting whatever 30 or 40,000 a year, but 30 or 40,000 a year in Mexico is a shit ton of money. Right. As we're here, it's barely enough to survive. So, but yeah, look at this. The median house, 644,000. Jesus.
in the region was around $644,000.
My dad built this house for $350,000 and was making probably $10,000 to $15,000 less than I was. My mom wasn't working at the time, and they were able to afford a $350,000 house on a $70,000 a year salary with a son. And that is just, that's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible. My aunt, who I fight with all the time, is always...
Well, and we'll get into that in a second, and she's talking about fighting with her aunt. We'll get into that, because that's actually a good scene here. But the whole deal about that is, she's right, is $70,000 back in the 90s, when her parents were coming up, and in the 90s, they had a good chance that they were going to make over 100 pretty quickly. Because wages were still increasing, because it's still the dot-com era, all that stuff, right? Markets are way, way up. You know, markets were booming in the 90s. So in that era, yeah, $70,000, you could get a decent home loan at whatever 3 or 4% interest. Yeah, you could get it. The $300,000 home wasn't a big deal. But in equivalent to today's dollars, It's not physically possible, depending on how you break it down. But you got to sit there and go, well, 70,000 in 95 is very different than 70,000 a day, right? And the house prices are very different. So here's her aunt bitching at her, and I think this is kind of funny because it gets to kind of a revelation about why this happens.
Saying how you have to give somewhere, right? And my cousin said something to her the other day and said, we're giving everywhere. We don't get property. We don't get good school systems. Whatever we're trading off is too much to trade off.
Victoria had brought up some conflict with her aunt a few times.
Oh, this is my Aunt Judy.
So I asked Aunt Judy to come on over and talk to us.
I talked about how much we fight about millennials, yes, but millennials living at home, and how you always say, well, you have to sacrifice something, but how much we're sacrificing. Like, we don't get like a big property, or we don't get like a nice house, or it's not in a good school system.
You have to start somewhere. You have to start anywhere. Just start your portfolio is what I told you. I don't care what it is. You don't have to live in Oceanport your first time.
No, but you were able to live in Oceanport the first time.
Okay, I guess it was different times.
Gen X and baby boomers may have a tougher time understanding what young adults are going through today because they enjoyed, until the pandemic recession hit, a solid almost 15 years of uninterrupted economic expansion. Baby boomers, Gen X, they weathered many economic downturns, including major recessions. But I think the big difference is that when they were starting to form their own households and starting to accumulate wealth, housing and higher ed were both more affordable relative to their incomes than they are now.
When I started out, I was making $35,000 a year. That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know.
Did you want it? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore. Where am I finding a $270,000
I'm
house?
not making $35,000 a year. Combined, we made 70.
In 1995, $70,000 was the equivalent of $145,000 today.
Look at that.
See, it's different when you put it in perspective, dollar to dollar.
Okay, but you know what? I'm going to say I agree with the aunt on some perspectives because, this girl, and I'm not saying all people in her generation are like that, but there are plenty, this girl thinks she should be able to buy a place in that town right there. And, quite frankly, when we got our first apartment or bought our first places, they weren't always in the like super great, awesome part that we wanted for our forever places. We kind of had to make some compromises to be able to sort of eke ourselves in somewhere.
Right.
Well, I do think that she has ideas that she should be able to just start off in, a certain level of place that's not always true.
Well,
people in the previous generations didn't frequently as well.
Well, I agree with you, and I agree with her on this point, which is that's what she's doing. She's living with her mom to try and get there. She's not starting off where she wants. So, I mean, you can look at it either way. She could, the answer, you could go, rent the apartment and whatnot, but could she save the money to get to where she wants to go? She'd probably have more freedom in the apartment. Her boyfriend or her would have more privacy. They'd probably be happier there, but they wouldn't have the money. They wouldn't be able to save to get to where they want to get. So, I mean, there's a trade-off here.
Even the first place they buy does not need to be in the fancy, rich, uppity sort of area. That's my point.
I don't know about the issue. I mean, the issue is they don't have the money, period. Now, you're right. They could, if she's being ridiculous, I want to get the $600,000 house. They can't really afford that. So it's kind of stupid to talk about. So, but if she's talking about, I think the argument there was, the aunt was saying, well, you're not going to live in this nice neighborhood to start out with, right, with oceanfront or whatever it was. And then she points out, well, yeah, but you did right out of the gate. So don't lecture me about having to make sacrifices when I'm living with my mother to try and save money.
Okay, but at the same time, was I don't know the answer to this, but was oceanfront then what it is now? A lot of times, neighborhoods that become freaking amazing. I'm not saying it was even rough, but like maybe weren't as amazing. You know what I mean? Like maybe it wasn't as expensive of a place comparatively. I don't know.
But
I don't have any.
It's the perspective though that I'm trying to get at here. Because look at the ad here where they talk about this.
That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house.
What's
They
this?
just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know.
Did you want it? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore.
See, that's what it would be today. So 270, yeah, $70,000. That's what it would be today. The other thing she's not factoring in is this. Back then, she didn't have the student loan payments that this girl probably has. On top of that fact, she doesn't have the extra costs. I mean, cars are more expensive. Just generally, gas is more expensive. All this stuff, right? And the other factor she doesn't factor in is when she got that house for $270, she's getting a first-time home loan with all the benefits of that. Plus, she's probably getting it at 3 or 4% interest. As where this girl's looking at 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even comparable to sit there and go, well, I was only making this and you're making this. No. And if you compare apples to apples, you were making probably 40% more than her, and the costs were probably about half or less than half. I mean, you can't compare the two. That's what I think was the whole big point of this and the argument. So it makes sense that you would have to be practical and people are cutting back. And that's why they're doing it. I'm just saying, I think it's a stigma to sit there and say, you know, you just need to shut up and take it. And I think that's part of the problem here. And I think that's a lot of what's led to a lot of what's going on right now, just socially and publicly, is that we're not getting what our parents got. And the distribution of wealth is so staggered anymore. Income inequality, wealth inequality is so incredible.
I agree with that, but I also think there's a certain amount of this generation that can have inflated expectations about what they should be able to be doing right out of the gate.
Sure, but that's
there's a starter car, a starter whatever, and sometimes we also have to reel back in our expectations for the very first thing. You know,
I think that's every generation when they're young. I'm not going to knock one generation or another. I think that's every generation when they're young. Because the bottom line is...
No, but we're currently addressing, this one.
No, I know. But the thing about it is that it also depends on what your living circumstances are, how much money your parents had, what the opportunity is to grow and get ahead. And there's just not that much anymore. And it would be one thing to sit there and say, well, you have too high expectations, but knowing that you're in a good economy and a good market and your education didn't cost that much and you don't have that much expense, and cost of living is a lot cheaper versus somebody whose cost of living is really high who's making less, and then sit there and go, well, you're just being spoiled. Well, that's easy for you to say when you were in a much better position, so you're the one who's spoiled. It's like the spoiled kid telling the kid who has nothing that you just need to shut up and take it. And I think that's the problem in that interaction. Is I don't think I don't think that goes anywhere. Because they still have to somehow survive and figure it out. So, anyway, it's interesting. Interesting stuff. I think there's too much of a stigma, though, on people having to do that. I mean, I've had clients where it's like, my kid's in this situation, it's like maybe they live with you for a while until they can get on their feet. And then, of course, pandemic and recession and all that doesn't help. But, you look at the Great Depression, that was what was going on. So, kind of interesting stuff. Do you have anything else you want to throw in there? Or?
Nope.
No? Okay. Well,